Don't invite her. She'll just make everything awkward and outdated. I smiled politely and continued arranging the appetizers I'd brought for the family gathering. What my son didn't know was that in 3 weeks, the entire family would be begging me for an invitation to the most exclusive reunion anyone had ever seen, aboard my private 120-foot yacht in the Mediterranean. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe so you never miss stories like this one. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. My name is Victoria. I'm 70 years old, and this story begins 5 years ago when my world completely collapsed in a way I never saw coming. For 45 years, I had been married to Jonathan Sterling, a successful maritime shipping executive who built Sterling Maritime from a small coastal operation into one of the largest shipping companies on the East Coast. But this story really starts with understanding who I was before everything fell apart. I wasn't just Jonathan's wife. I was his business partner in every sense of the word. While he handled the operational side of Sterling Maritime, I managed the financial planning, client relationships, and strategic partnerships that turned his shipping routes into a maritime empire. I had a master's degree in international business from Columbia, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had personally negotiated shipping contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Before marrying Jonathan, I'd worked for the State Department's Trade Division, where I specialized in Mediterranean and European maritime commerce. When we met at a shipping industry conference in Monaco, I was already established in my own right. Our marriage was a true partnership. While Jonathan captained the ships and managed the logistics, I built the relationships that filled those ships with cargo. I spent decades cultivating connections with European manufacturers, Greek shipping families, and Italian port authorities. I was the one who secured our exclusive contracts with luxury resort chains across the Mediterranean, turning Sterling Maritime into the preferred shipping partner for high-end hospitality imports. We lived well, but not ostentatiously. Our home in Newport was elegant but understated, a restored 1890s mansion overlooking the harbor where we could watch our ships come and go. Jonathan always said I had the finest taste of anyone he'd ever known, whether we were selecting art for our home, choosing wines for our cellar, or planning the perfect dinner party for potential clients. I was deeply involved in Newport's cultural scene. I served on the board of the Newport Music Festival, helped organize the annual Maritime Heritage Celebration, and was a founding member of the Coastal Women's Business Alliance. I wasn't just a wealthy man's wife. I was a respected community leader who happened to be married to a successful businessman. Our son Michael was born when I was 28, and I managed to balance motherhood with my business responsibilities seamlessly. Jonathan often traveled for weeks at a time, supervising shipping routes or meeting with port authorities, so Michael and I developed an incredibly close bond. I was the parent who attended every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. I helped him with homework in 3 languages, taught him about different cultures through the artifacts we'd collected during business trips, and shared my love of classical music and fine art. Michael was brilliant, graduating summa cum laude from Harvard Business School, and I was immensely proud when he chose to join Sterling Maritime. I had dreams of the 3 of us working together, of Michael eventually taking over the company that Jonathan and I had built from nothing. But somewhere along the way, Michael began to see me differently. Maybe it was the influence of his Harvard MBA program, where he'd learned about modern business practices and streamlined management structures. Maybe it was the young executives he'd started hiring, who viewed my hands-on involvement in client relationships as old-fashioned and micromanaging. The first sign of trouble came during a board meeting when Michael suggested we modernize our approach to client relations by transitioning away from personal relationship-based contracts toward data-driven partnership models. He was essentially arguing that my decades of carefully cultivated personal relationships with clients were outdated and inefficient. "Mom," he said during that meeting, his tone patronizing in a way that made my stomach clench. "I know you've worked hard to build these relationships, but in today's business environment, companies want streamlined professional interactions. They don't want to feel obligated to attend dinner parties or remember personal details about executives' families." I tried to explain that our European clients, particularly the Greek and Italian families, conducted business based on trust and personal connection, that the reason Sterling Maritime had exclusive contracts with luxury resorts was because I had spent 20 years building genuine friendships with the decision-makers, that removing the personal element would mean losing millions in revenue. But Michael had already made up his mind. He'd brought in a consulting firm that recommended professionalizing our client relations by assigning account managers and eliminating what they called unnecessary social expenses. Jonathan, who was 73 and increasingly tired from decades of travel, seemed relieved to let Michael take the lead. "Maybe it's time for fresh perspectives," he said when I expressed my concerns privately. "Michael has those fancy business school ideas. Let's see what he can do." What Michael could do, it turned out, was systematically dismantle everything I'd built. Within 6 months of implementing his new professional approach, we lost 3 major European clients. The Greek shipping family that had been our largest partner for 15 years was offended when Michael assigned a junior account manager to handle their relationship, instead of continuing our tradition of quarterly dinners and holiday celebrations. The Italian resort chain that had been exclusively using Sterling Maritime for luxury imports ended our contract when Michael's team tried to renegotiate terms via email rather than the face-to-face meetings they expected. But Michael blamed these losses on market changes and outdated business models. He convinced Jonathan that the lost revenue was a temporary adjustment period and that the new approach would be more profitable in the long run. Then came the devastating blow that changed everything. Jonathan suffered a massive heart attack while inspecting one of our newest ships in the Boston harbor. He was rushed to Massachusetts General Hospital, where he spent 3 weeks in intensive care before passing away on a cold February morning. I was holding his hand when he died, and his last words to me were, "Take care of our legacy, Victoria. Don't let anyone diminish what we built together." The funeral was everything Jonathan would have wanted, a celebration of his life attended by shipping executives from around the world, maritime officials, and the European business partners, who had become genuine friends over the decades. I delivered a eulogy that honored both his vision and our partnership, speaking about how Sterling Maritime had been built through the combination of his operational expertise and our shared commitment to relationship-based business. But even during the funeral, I could sense Michael's impatience with what he saw as my overly emotional approach to business relationships. When our Greek partners approached me afterward to express their condolences and their concerns about the future of our partnership, Michael interrupted the conversation to assure them that Sterling Maritime would continue to operate with the highest professional standards under new management. The reading of Jonathan's will 2 weeks later should have been straightforward. Jonathan and I had built Sterling Maritime together, and I expected to inherit his shares of the company, making me the majority owner. We'd discussed this arrangement many times over the years, and Jonathan had always assured me that I would have the controlling interest needed to protect the business we'd created. But Michael had been busy during Jonathan's final months. It turned out that in the year before his death, when Jonathan was increasingly overwhelmed by health issues and business pressures, Michael had convinced him to restructure the company's ownership. The new arrangement gave Michael 60% controlling interest, while I received only 30%, with the remaining 10% held in a trust for future expansion. Michael presented this as a natural transition plan that would ensure the company's stability under experienced leadership. He'd convinced Jonathan that given my age and the changing business environment, it would be better for me to transition into an advisory role while Michael took operational control. I was devastated. not just because I'd lost my husband, but because I'd simultaneously lost control of the company I'd helped build from nothing. Everything I'd worked for over 4 decades, the relationships, the contracts, the reputation, was now in the hands of someone who fundamentally misunderstood how our business worked. The months that followed were a masterclass in being systematically pushed out of my own company. Michael immediately implemented what he called organizational restructuring. My office, which had been next to Jonathan's on the executive floor, was relocated to a smaller space on the 3rd floor under the guise of optimizing space utilization. My assistant of 15 years was reassigned to other duties because Michael felt I no longer needed dedicated administrative support. Most painfully, I was excluded from client meetings. Michael explained that he wanted to establish clear lines of authority and avoid confusing clients with multiple points of contact. When I protested that these clients were my personal relationships built over decades, he replied that Sterling Maritime needed to move beyond personality-dependent business models. The European partners I'd worked with for years began calling me directly, confused about why they were suddenly dealing with junior account managers instead of me. Giuseppe Romano, whose family had been importing luxury goods through Sterling Maritime for 12 years, called me at home one evening. "Victoria, my dear friend," he said in his warm Italian accent. "What has happened? This young man, this Michael, he sends me forms to fill out like I am applying for a loan. Where are you? Why are we not meeting for dinner to discuss the spring shipping schedule like we always do?" I had to explain, with tremendous embarrassment, that I was no longer handling client relationships. Giuseppe was quiet for a long moment, then said something that chilled me to the bone. "If Sterling Maritime no longer values personal relationships, perhaps it is time for my family to find new partners who do." Within 3 months, we lost Giuseppe's account. Then Maria Stavros, our primary contact with the Greek resort development company, ended our 15-year partnership. Then the Dubois family in France. Then the luxury hotel chain in Spain. Michael blamed these losses on market volatility and clients who couldn't adapt to modern business practices. He never acknowledged that we were losing millions in revenue because he'd destroyed relationships that had taken me decades to build. But the most heartbreaking part wasn't the business losses. It was watching my son transform from someone I'd raised to be respectful and thoughtful into someone who seemed to view me as an obstacle to his success. During family dinners, Michael would talk about his vision for Sterling Maritime's future, as if the company's past, our past, was something to be overcome rather than honored. When I'd offer insights based on my experience with specific clients or regions, he'd respond with phrases like, "That may have worked in the past, but we need to focus on scalable solutions," or, "I appreciate your perspective, but we're implementing best practices from leading business schools." It was death by 1,000 cuts. Every day brought a new way of being marginalized, dismissed, or made to feel like my decades of experience were not just irrelevant, but actively harmful to the company's progress. The worst part was that I could see exactly what was happening, but I felt powerless to stop it. Michael controlled the company, controlled the narrative, and seemed determined to prove that Sterling Maritime could be more successful without my involvement. 6 months after Jonathan's death, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I told Michael I was taking an extended sabbatical to process my grief and consider my future role with the company. What I didn't tell him was that I had no intention of coming back to watch him systematically destroy everything Jonathan and I had built together. I also didn't tell him that during those final months of feeling pushed out and disrespected, I had been quietly making phone calls to some very old friends in very interesting places. Because while Michael had been busy restructuring Sterling Maritime, I had been remembering exactly who I was before I became Jonathan's business partner. I was a woman who had built international relationships, who understood global commerce, and who had more connections in the maritime industry than my son could possibly imagine. And I was about to remind him, and everyone else, that dismissing someone with my experience and resources was the kind of mistake that could change everything. But first, I needed to disappear for a while and let Michael learn some very expensive lessons about the value of relationships he'd so carelessly thrown away. The stage was set for the most educational family reunion in Sterling family history. What I didn't expect during those first devastating months after Jonathan's death and my effective exile from Sterling Maritime was that Michael would suddenly become interested in playing the role of the caring son. It started about 3 months after I'd announced my sabbatical, when he began calling me with what seemed like genuine concern for my well-being. "Mom, I've been thinking," he said during one of these calls, his voice carrying that carefully, modulated tone he used when he wanted something. "You've been through so much with Dad's death and all the changes at the company. Maybe you shouldn't be living alone in that big house." The big house he was referring to was the Newport mansion Jonathan and I had lovingly restored over 20 years. It was a 12,000-square-foot Victorian masterpiece overlooking the harbor, filled with art we'd collected during our travels and memories of 4 decades of entertaining clients, friends, and family. The house where I'd raised Michael, where Jonathan and I had hosted countless dinner parties that sealed million-dollar shipping contracts, where every room held echoes of our life together. "I'm fine, Michael," I replied carefully. "The house keeps me connected to your father's memory, and I have Mrs. Patterson coming in twice a week to help with maintenance. But Mom, it's not just about the upkeep, it's about isolation. You're 70 years old, living alone in a house that's way too big for one person. What if something happens? What if you fall or have a medical emergency?" It was a reasonable concern, and part of me was touched that he seemed to be thinking about my safety and well-being. After months of feeling dismissed and marginalized, his attention felt like a welcome change. "What are you suggesting?" I asked. "Well, Jennifer and I have been talking." Jennifer was Michael's wife, a perfectly pleasant woman who'd always been polite to me but maintained a certain distance that I'd attributed to natural daughter-in-law dynamics. Our house in Westport has that beautiful guest wing that's barely used. It has its own entrance, a lovely sitting room, and views of the water. You could have complete privacy, but still be close to family. I felt my chest tighten with a mix of emotions. On one hand, the offer seemed generous and thoughtful. Michael and Jennifer lived in a stunning contemporary home in Westport, Connecticut, about 2 hours from Newport. It would mean being closer to them and their 2 children, my grandchildren, Emma, who was 12, and James, who was 10, whom I'd barely seen since Jonathan's death. On the other hand, the idea of leaving my home, my independence, and my connection to the life Jonathan and I had built together felt like another kind of death. "That's very thoughtful," I said slowly. "But I'm not sure I'm ready to leave Newport. This house, this community, it's all I have left of the life your father and I built." "I understand, Mom, I really do. But think about Emma and James. They miss their grandmother, and Jennifer feels terrible that they don't get to spend more time with you. With everything you've been through, wouldn't it be nice to be around family, to feel needed and loved?" The mention of my grandchildren was a direct hit to my heart. Emma was developing into a remarkable young woman, intelligent, artistic, and curious about the world in ways that reminded me of myself at that age. James was a bright, energetic boy who loved hearing stories about the places Jonathan and I had traveled for business. Since Jonathan's death and my removal from Sterling Maritime, I'd seen them only a handful of times, and I missed them desperately. "And honestly," Michael continued, "Jennifer could really use your help. She's been overwhelmed trying to manage her own career while handling all the household responsibilities. Having you there would be such a blessing for all of us." Jennifer worked as a marketing executive for a luxury goods company, and I knew she traveled frequently for work. The idea that I could be helpful, that my presence would be valued rather than tolerated, was incredibly appealing after months of feeling useless and unwanted. Would this be a temporary arrangement while I figure out what I want to do long term? I asked. Of course. This is just about giving you time to heal and process everything that's happened. There's no pressure for any permanent decisions. We just want you to feel supported and loved during this difficult time. Over the next several weeks, Michael was remarkably attentive and persuasive. He called every few days to check on me, sometimes bringing Emma and James to the phone to express how excited they were about the possibility of having Grandma Victoria closer by. He arranged for me to visit their Westport home for a weekend, during which Jennifer gave me a thorough tour of the guest wing and spoke enthusiastically about all the ways I could be involved in family life. Victoria, you have such incredible taste, Jennifer said as we walked through the guest suite, which was indeed beautiful. A spacious bedroom, elegant sitting room, and private bathroom with French doors opening onto a terrace overlooking Long Island Sound. I've always felt intimidated trying to decorate this space. I could really use your expertise in making it feel more sophisticated. She showed me the main house, pointing out areas where she felt out of her depth in terms of design and entertaining. I know you were famous for your dinner parties when you and Jonathan were building Sterling Maritime. I would love to learn from you. Michael's been telling me about the incredible events you used to host for European clients. They sound so elegant and sophisticated. It was exactly what I needed to hear. After months of being told that my approach to business was outdated and my experience was irrelevant, Jennifer was treating me like someone with valuable knowledge and skills to share. The children were equally enthusiastic. Emma, who was taking French in school, was thrilled to learn that I spoke the language fluently and could help her with pronunciation and cultural context. James was fascinated by my stories about traveling to ports across the Mediterranean and begged me to teach him about different countries and their maritime traditions. Grandma Victoria, Emma said as we sat on the terrace during my visit, could you teach me about art? Mom said you and Grandpa collected paintings from all over Europe. I want to learn about artists and different styles. And could you teach me about ships? James added. I want to know about all the places you and Grandpa went for business. Maybe I could work for Sterling Maritime someday too. The enthusiasm in their voices, their genuine interest in my experiences and knowledge, was intoxicating after the dismissal I'd been experiencing from Michael in the business context. Here were family members who actually valued what I had to offer. During that weekend visit, Michael also made a point of asking for my advice on various family matters. He sought my opinion on Emma's school situation, asked for my thoughts on James's piano lessons, and even requested my input on some household management decisions. It felt wonderful to be consulted, to have my opinions matter again. Mom, you raised me to be successful and thoughtful, he said during a quiet moment on Sunday evening. I want to make sure I'm doing the same for Emma and James. Having you closer would mean they could benefit from your wisdom and experience on a regular basis. By the end of the weekend, I was seriously considering the move. The guest wing was lovely. The children clearly wanted me there, and Jennifer seemed genuinely enthusiastic about having me become part of their household. Most importantly, Michael was treating me with a respect and appreciation that had been missing from our recent interactions. But I still had reservations about leaving Newport, about giving up my independence and the last tangible connection to the life Jonathan and I had shared. Michael seemed to understand my hesitation. Mom, what if we started with a trial period? Maybe just a few months. You could keep the Newport house and see how you feel about being with us. If it doesn't work out, you could always go back. And what about my things? My furniture, my art, collection, all the pieces Jonathan and I gathered over the years? We'll make room for whatever you want to bring. The guest wing has plenty of space for your personal items, and honestly, your taste is so much better than ours. I'd love for you to bring some of your beautiful pieces to make the space truly your own. It was Jennifer who made the final persuasive Argument. Victoria, I have to travel for work quite a bit over the next few months. The luxury goods industry is expanding into new markets, and I need to be in Europe regularly. Michael tries to help, but he's overwhelmed with Sterling Maritime, especially with all the client changes lately. Having you here would mean Emma and James have someone they love and trust taking care of them when we're both traveling. You'd really be saving us. The idea that I would be needed, that my presence would solve real problems for them rather than creating inconvenience, was irresistible. And the mention of Jennifer's European travel triggered my old instincts. I found myself offering advice about navigating business relationships in different countries, sharing insights about cultural expectations and protocols that I'd learned during my decades in international maritime commerce. "Oh my goodness," Jennifer said when I mentioned some of the challenges she might face with Italian manufacturers. "I had no idea about those cultural considerations. Michael said you were brilliant at international business, but I didn't realize how much expertise you have. This is exactly the kind of guidance I need." Within a month, I had made the decision to accept their invitation. I arranged for most of my furniture to be put in storage, but I brought several of my favorite pieces to the guest wing: an antique writing desk where I could handle correspondence, a small but valuable collection of Mediterranean maritime art, and my grandmother's china service that I'd always used for special occasions. The move itself was emotional. As I watched the moving truck pull away from the Newport mansion with boxes of my belongings, I felt like I was closing a chapter of my life that I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to reopen. But Michael was there with me, helping coordinate the logistics and providing emotional support. "Mom, this is going to be great," he said as we locked the front door of the house where I'd lived for 2 decades. "You're not losing anything. You're gaining the chance to be a real part of Emma and James's daily lives. They're going to learn so much from you." The first few weeks in Westport were everything Michael and Jennifer had promised. I settled into the guest wing, which was indeed beautiful and comfortable. Jennifer consulted me on everything from menu planning for a dinner party she was hosting to advice about European business etiquette for her upcoming trip to Milan. I helped Emma with her French homework and shared stories about the art Jonathan and I had seen in museums across Europe. I taught James about maritime geography and showed him how to identify different types of cargo ships from the harbor views visible from the house. Most satisfyingly, I felt useful again. When Jennifer traveled for work, I managed the household seamlessly. I coordinated the children's schedules, supervised homework, and even helped Michael by handling some of the domestic responsibilities that usually fell to Jennifer. I planned and prepared elaborate dinners when Michael brought business associates home, drawing on decades of experience entertaining clients and partners. "Mom, that dinner you made for the Port Authority executives was incredible," Michael said after one particularly successful evening. "I forgot how amazing you are at making business relationships feel personal and welcoming. Jennifer's been trying to figure out how to entertain properly, but you make it look effortless." I was happy. For the first time since Jonathan's death, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged, contributing meaningfully to my family's life and sharing my experience in ways that were valued and appreciated. But most importantly, I was building genuine relationships with Emma and James. Emma would often join me in the sitting room after school, where I'd help her with homework while sharing stories about the places Jonathan and I had traveled. She was particularly fascinated by my descriptions of Venice, where we'd negotiated some of our most important shipping contracts. "Grandma, could we go to Venice together someday?" she asked one afternoon as we looked through photos from one of my business trips. "I want to see the palaces you described and the glass factories on Murano Island." "I would love nothing more," I told her, meaning every word. "There's so much of the world I'd love to show you." James was equally engaging, though his interests ran more toward the technical aspects of shipping and international trade. He'd sit beside me while I explained how cargo was loaded and secured, how weather patterns affected shipping routes, and how different ports had unique challenges and advantages. "Could I visit one of Sterling Maritime's ships?" he asked one evening. "I want to see how everything works." I felt a pang of sadness, knowing that my access to Sterling Maritime was now extremely limited. But I promised him we'd find a way to arrange a tour. For 3 months, everything was perfect. I was the helpful grandmother, the experienced advisor, the elegant hostess who made family dinners feel special and sophisticated. Jennifer relied on my input for everything from interior design decisions to advice about handling difficult European clients. Michael seemed to genuinely value my presence and frequently commented on how much happier the children seemed with me there. I should have realized it was too good to last. But during those blissful months of feeling needed and valued, I missed the subtle signs that the dynamics were already beginning to shift. Small comments that didn't quite sit right. Occasions when I felt like I was being managed rather than consulted. Moments when Michael and Jennifer would exchange glances that seemed to communicate something I wasn't part of. I was so grateful to feel useful again, so happy to be close to my grandchildren, so relieved to be treated with respect and appreciation, that I didn't notice the foundation was already beginning to crack. The first real sign of trouble came on a cold December evening when I overheard a phone conversation that changed everything I thought I understood about my place in their family. But that story, and what I learned that night, would have to wait until I was ready to face the truth about why Michael had really wanted me to move in with them. Because sometimes the people who rescue you aren't actually saving you at all. Sometimes they're just moving you into position for something much worse than what you escaped from. And sometimes the kindness that feels most genuine is actually the most calculated manipulation of all. I was about to learn that lesson in the most painful way possible. The first real sign of trouble came on a cold December evening, when I overheard a phone conversation that changed everything I thought I understood about my place in their family. I had been living in the Westport guest wing for 3 months, and it was the week before Christmas. Jennifer was in Milan for a luxury goods trade show, and I was handling the household responsibilities, coordinating Emma and James's holiday break schedules, managing the Christmas preparations, and helping Michael navigate the domestic details that Jennifer usually handled. That particular evening, I had prepared one of my signature dinners for Michael and the children, coq au vin with roasted winter vegetables, a recipe I'd perfected during our business trips to Provence. The children had gone to bed after we'd spent the evening addressing Christmas cards and planning our holiday traditions. I was in the guest wing, settling down with a book and a glass of wine, when I realized I'd left my reading glasses in the main kitchen. As I walked through the connecting hallway between the guest wing and the main house, I could hear Michael's voice coming from his home office, which was just off the kitchen. The door was slightly ajar, and his tone was hushed but intense, the way he spoke when he was handling sensitive business matters. I should have announced my presence or simply returned to retrieve my glasses later. But something in his tone made me pause, and what I heard next stopped me cold. "No, Robert, the arrangement is working perfectly," Michael was saying. "She's been here 3 months now, and it's exactly what we hoped for. Free childcare, household management, and she's even handling the entertaining when I need to bring business associates home." There was a pause while the person on the other end, Robert, who I realized must be Robert Chen, Michael's business partner and closest friend, responded. "Of course it's saving us money," Michael continued. "Do you know what we were spending on housekeepers and nannies before she moved in? And now, Emma and James are being supervised by someone who actually cares about them, so Jennifer doesn't feel guilty about traveling for work." Another pause. Then Michael's voice took on a tone that made my blood run cold. "The best part is that she thinks she's needed and valued. You should see how eager she is to help with everything. She's like a high-end domestic service that comes with emotional investment." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. High-end domestic service. That's how my son viewed my presence in his home, not as a beloved family member contributing to their lives, but as free labor with emotional attachment. No, no, Michael was saying, and I could hear him walking around his office. She's not suspicious at all. She's so grateful to feel useful again after everything with Sterling Maritime that she hasn't questioned anything. And honestly, Robert, it's working out better than we expected. She has incredible standards. She knows how to manage a household properly, and the kids are getting a level of attention and education that we could never afford to hire. The conversation continued, but I felt like I was hearing it through water. Michael was describing me like a resource he'd acquired, detailing the benefits of my presence as if I were a particularly good business investment. The timing was perfect, he said. After Dad died and we restructured Sterling Maritime, she was vulnerable and isolated. When I suggested she move in with us, she practically jumped at the chance. She was so desperate to feel needed that she didn't ask any difficult questions about the arrangement. I realized I was gripping the doorframe so tightly that my knuckles had turned white. The rescue that had felt so generous, so caring, had actually been a calculated move to acquire unpaid household help. Jennifer loves it too, Michael continued. Before Mom moved in, we were always scrambling to coordinate childcare when Jennifer had to travel. Now she can take any assignment without worrying about the kids, and she knows they're being taken care of by someone who actually teaches them things instead of just keeping them occupied. The casual way he discussed the benefits of my presence, as if I were a particularly efficient appliance, was devastating. But what came next was even worse. The only challenge is managing her expectations, Michael said. She sometimes acts like she has decision-making authority in family matters, which Jennifer finds annoying. We have to be careful to make her feel included without actually giving her any real influence. I heard Robert's voice through the phone, though I couldn't make out the words. Exactly, Michael replied. We consult her on things that don't matter and ignore her input on things that do. Like, we'll ask her opinion on what wine to serve at dinner parties, but we don't involve her in any real decisions about the kids, education, or our social calendar. She gets the satisfaction of feeling heard without actually having any power. The conversation continued, but I had heard enough. I quietly retreated to the guest wing, my hands shaking as I closed the door behind me. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to process what I'd just learned. Everything I had interpreted as love and respect had actually been management and manipulation. The consultation on household matters that had made me feel valued was just a strategy to keep me cooperative. The gratitude for my help with Emma and James wasn't appreciation for my contributions as a grandmother. It was relief at having found a solution to their childcare challenges. I felt like an idiot. A lonely, grieving widow who had been so desperate to feel needed that she'd walked straight into a situation where she was being used. But the worst part wasn't the deception itself. The worst part was realizing how perfectly it was working. I had been so grateful for their apparent kindness that I'd never questioned the underlying dynamics. I'd been providing thousands of dollars worth of services, household management, childcare, tutoring, entertaining, without any compensation or even acknowledgement of the economic value I was contributing. That night, I lay awake replaying every interaction from the past 3 months, seeing them all through this new lens. The enthusiastic way Jennifer had consulted me about decorating and entertaining, she was getting professional-level interior design and event planning services for free. The way Michael praised my dinner parties with business associates, I was handling his corporate entertaining obligations without him having to hire caterers or event planners. Even my relationships with Emma and James, which had felt so genuine and meaningful, were being viewed by their parents as a convenient solution to their childcare needs rather than valuable intergenerational bonding. I started to notice things I had missed before. Small comments that revealed how they really viewed our arrangement. The next morning, when Jennifer returned from Milan, she was effusive in her gratitude for how I'd managed everything in her absence. But as she recounted her trip to Michael, I heard her say, It's such a relief knowing Victoria can handle everything when I travel. I don't have to worry about anything domestic. It's like having a live-in household manager who actually cares about the family. A household manager. Not a grandmother, not a family member, not someone whose presence enriched their lives in meaningful ways. A household manager. Over the following weeks, I began to notice the subtle ways they controlled my involvement in family decisions while maintaining the illusion that my input mattered. When it came time to plan Emma's birthday party, for example, Jennifer asked for my opinions on decorations and menu ideas, making me feel like a valued collaborator. But when I suggested inviting some of Emma's school friends that I'd gotten to know through carpooling and after-school activities, Jennifer politely dismissed the idea. "Oh, Victoria, that's so thoughtful. But we've already decided to keep it small this year, just family and a few very close friends," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Later, I overheard her on the phone with one of her friends saying, "We're having Emma's party at the country club this year. I know it's more expensive, but Michael's been making some good connections there, and it's important for networking." They were having the party at the country club, a decision that had apparently been made before they ever consulted me, and inviting parents and children I'd never heard them mention before. My input on decorations and menu had been solicited not because they valued my opinion, but because they needed someone to handle the planning details for an event they'd already conceptualized without me. The pattern became clear once I started looking for it. They would ask for my advice on implementation while excluding me from decision-making. They wanted my labor and expertise, but not my influence or authority. The most painful example came when James expressed interest in taking sailing lessons. Having grown up around maritime activities, I was thrilled and immediately offered to research sailing programs and even teach him some basics myself. I had learned to sail as a young woman and had maintained those skills throughout my life with Jonathan. "That's wonderful, Victoria," Jennifer said when I brought up James's interest. "Would you mind looking into some programs for us? You probably know much more about sailing than we do." I spent hours researching youth sailing programs in the area, comparing curricula, safety records, and costs. I compiled a detailed report with my recommendations and even reached out to my contacts in the local maritime community to get insider perspectives on the best instructors. When I presented my research to Michael and Jennifer, they were appropriately grateful and impressed. "This is incredible, Mom," Michael said. "You've done such thorough work. We really appreciate you taking the time to put this together." But the next week, I overheard Jennifer on the phone enrolling James in a completely different sailing program. One that hadn't even been on my list because it was significantly more expensive and, frankly, less comprehensive than my top recommendations. When I asked about the decision, Jennifer explained, "We decided to go with the Yacht Club program because several families from James's school use it, and we thought it would be good for him to be with his classmates." It was a reasonable explanation, but it highlighted the reality of my position. They had used my expertise to research options, but they'd made their decision based on social considerations I hadn't been told were important. I was valuable for my labor and knowledge, but not for my judgment or decision-making authority. The social dynamics became even clearer during their Christmas party that year. Jennifer had asked for my help planning the event, and I had thrown myself into the project with enthusiasm. I designed the menu, coordinated with vendors, and handled most of the preparation and setup. But during the party itself, I realized I was functioning more as staff than as family. Jennifer introduced me to guests as Michael's mother, who's been such a help with the party planning, but the conversations never went deeper than polite acknowledgments of my contributions. Meanwhile, I watched Jennifer navigate the room like a confident hostess, accepting compliments on the beautiful event without mentioning that I had designed and executed most of it. When guests praised the elegant appetizers or the sophisticated wine selection, she smiled graciously and said things like, "Thank you. We really wanted to create something special." I spent most of the evening in the kitchen, managing the flow of food and coordinating with the catering staff I'd hired. When I did join the party, I felt like an outsider looking in on a social world that I wasn't truly part of, despite having created the framework that made it possible. But the most telling moment came near the end of the evening, when I overheard Jennifer talking to one of her friends in the hallway. "Your party was absolutely gorgeous," the friend was saying. "How do you manage to pull off something so elegant with your busy schedule?" "Honestly, having Michael's mother living with us has been a godsend," Jennifer replied. "She has such sophisticated taste and experience with entertaining. I just have to point her in the right direction, and she handles all the details." Point her in the right direction. As if I were an employee receiving assignments rather than a family member sharing my expertise and enthusiasm. That night, as I cleaned up the remnants of the party while Michael and Jennifer went to bed, I felt the full weight of my situation. I was living in their house, providing valuable services, contributing to their lifestyle and success. But I was being treated as a particularly useful household resource rather than a respected family member. The children, Emma and James, were the only bright spot in an increasingly painful dynamic. Their affection for me seemed genuine, and our relationships felt authentic in ways that my interactions with their parents increasingly did not. But even there, I began to notice how Michael and Jennifer managed my influence. When Emma asked if I could take her to visit the art museums in New York City, something I'd mentioned wanting to share with her, Jennifer quickly intervened. "That's such a lovely idea, Victoria, but Emma has so many activities already scheduled. Maybe we can plan something like that for summer vacation." Summer vacation never came, and when I brought up the museum trip again, Jennifer had a new reason why it wasn't convenient. Similarly, when James expressed interest in learning more about Sterling Maritime and possibly visiting one of our ships, Michael was enthusiastic in conversation but evasive when it came to making actual arrangements. "That's a great idea, Mom. Let me see what I can set up," he would say, but weeks would pass without any follow-through. I began to realize that while they wanted me to educate and engage with the children on subjects that enriched their development, they didn't want me to create experiences or relationships that might give me independent influence in Emma and James's lives. The control was subtle, but comprehensive. I could teach James about maritime geography in their living room, but I couldn't take him to see actual ships. I could help Emma with her French homework, but I couldn't take her to French cultural events in the city. I could share my knowledge and enthusiasm, but only within the boundaries they set. By February, 6 months after moving in with them, I had a clear understanding of my actual role in their household. I was a high-end domestic service provider who happened to be related to them. I managed their home, cared for their children, handled their entertaining, and provided educational enrichment, all without compensation, contracts, or genuine decision-making. Authority, but they had been careful to make the arrangement feel like family generosity rather than economic exploitation. They consulted me just enough to make me feel valued, praised my contributions just enough to keep me motivated, and included me just enough to prevent me from feeling completely marginalized. It was a masterful manipulation, and I had to admit, with a mixture of admiration and horror, that it was working exactly as they had intended. The question was, what was I going to do about it? Because while I had been playing the role of grateful grandmother and helpful household manager, I had also been doing something else. Something that Michael and Jennifer couldn't possibly have anticipated, because they had no idea who I really was or what resources I actually had access to. I had been making phone calls, very interesting phone calls to very old friends in very strategic places, and I was beginning to formulate a plan that would teach them exactly what it meant to underestimate Victoria Sterling. But first, I needed to endure a few more months of being treated like a useful appliance. Because the longer they took me for granted, the more devastating their education was going to be, and I was very much looking forward to their education. The harsh realities of my situation became undeniably clear during what should have been one of the happiest moments of my time in Westport, Emma's spring art show at school. It was mid-March, and for months I had been helping Emma with her art projects, sharing techniques I'd learned during my years of collecting pieces across Europe. With Jonathan, Emma had a natural talent that reminded me of myself at her age, and working with her had become one of my greatest joys during those increasingly difficult months of living in their guest wing. When Emma told me about the school art show where students would display their best work for parents and family members, I was thrilled. She had been working on a series of watercolor paintings inspired by my stories about Venice, and I was excited to see her work displayed and to meet her art teacher, who Emma said had been impressed by the techniques I'd taught her. "Grandma Victoria, you have to come," Emma said one afternoon as we worked together in the sunroom that had become our informal art studio. "Mrs. Richardson wants to meet you. I told her about all the museums you've visited and how you taught me about color theory and composition. I wouldn't miss it for the world," I assured her, and I meant it. This felt like exactly the kind of meaningful involvement in my grandchildren's lives that I had hoped for when I moved to Westport. But when I mentioned the art show to Jennifer that evening, her response was unexpected. "Oh, that's so sweet. That Emma wants you there," she said, not looking up from her laptop where she was reviewing travel itineraries for another European business trip. "But I should probably mention that these school events can be a bit overwhelming. Lots of parents, very crowded, and sometimes the social dynamics get complicated." I felt a familiar pang of unease. "Complicated how?" "Well, you know how these things are. Parents tend to cluster with families they know from school activities and social circles. Since you haven't been involved in the school community, it might be awkward for you to navigate." Michael, who was reading nearby, looked up from his newspaper. "Mom, maybe it would be better if you stayed home this time. Jennifer and I can represent the family and we'll take lots of photos to show you." The suggestion hit me like a slap. "But Emma specifically asked me to come. She wants to introduce me to her art teacher." "And that's lovely," Jennifer said in that carefully modulated tone I was beginning to recognize as her way of dismissing my concerns while appearing reasonable. "But Emma's 12 years old. She doesn't understand the social complexity of these events. It would be better for everyone if the immediate family handles school functions." "I am immediate family," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm her grandmother." Michael and Jennifer exchanged one of their looks, the kind of wordless communication that excluded me completely while making decisions about my life. "Of course, you're family, Mom," Michael said. "But you have to understand that Jennifer and I have spent 2 years building relationships with other parents at Emma's school. These people don't know you, and showing up with an extra family member might send the wrong message about our family structure." "What kind of message?" "Well, that we can't manage our own household responsibilities," Jennifer explained. "Some of these parents are very traditional about family roles. If they see that we need Michael's mother to help with childcare and school events, it might affect how they view us professionally and socially." I stared at them, trying to process what I was hearing. They were worried that my presence at Emma's art show would make them look incompetent as parents. They were more concerned about the opinions of other parents than about Emma's desire to share her accomplishments with her grandmother. "Emma will be disappointed," I said quietly. "Emma will understand," Michael replied. "We'll explain that you had other commitments but that you're very proud of her work. They wanted me to lie to my granddaughter, to pretend I had chosen not to attend rather than admit they had forbidden me from coming." That night, I lay in bed thinking about how completely my role had been redefined. I could help Emma with her art in private, providing the kind of sophisticated instruction that enhanced her skills and knowledge. But I couldn't be acknowledged publicly as having contributed to her development, because that might reflect poorly on her parents. I was valuable as a resource, but liability as a representative. The art show took place on a Thursday evening, and I spent those hours alone in the guest wing, looking through my own art books and thinking about all the museums and galleries Jonathan and I had visited together. I imagined Emma showing her Venice-inspired paintings to her classmates and teacher, explaining the techniques I'd taught her, while her parents stood nearby accepting compliments for her artistic development. When they returned home that evening, they were full of enthusiasm about Emma's success. She won second place in her age category, Jennifer announced. The art teacher was so impressed with her technical skills. She said Emma has been applying some very sophisticated concepts that are unusual for someone her age. Mrs. Richardson asked where Emma had learned about color theory and composition, Michael added. We told her that Emma's been doing a lot of independent reading about art. Independent reading. Not instruction from her grandmother who had studied art history and had personal relationships with gallery curators across Europe. Independent reading. They had erased my contribution entirely, taking credit for Emma's artistic development while ensuring that no one at the school knew I existed. Emma, when she came to show me her ribbon and tell me about the evening, was more honest about what had happened. Mrs. Richardson said my paintings looked like someone had been teaching me professional techniques, she said, settling into the chair beside my desk where we usually work together. I told her about all the things you've taught me, and she said she'd love to meet you sometime. What did your parents say? Emma's expression shifted slightly. Mom said maybe we could arrange something later, but that Mrs. Richardson is very busy. Even a 12-year-old could sense the deflection, but the art show was just the beginning of a pattern that became increasingly obvious over the following weeks. Every time an opportunity arose for me to be publicly acknowledged as a meaningful part of Emma and James's lives, Michael and Jennifer found ways to limit or eliminate my involvement. When James's class was studying maritime history and his teacher suggested bringing in a guest speaker with industry experience, I eagerly volunteered. I had decades of first-hand knowledge about shipping, international trade, and maritime culture that would have been perfect for a classroom presentation, but when I mentioned it to Michael, he looked uncomfortable. That's a great idea, Mom, but I think it might be better if I handle it. I could talk about Sterling Maritime's current operations, which would be more relevant to the kids' curriculum. But I have so much more experience with the historical aspects, and I've actually been to most of the ports and countries they're studying. True. But you have to remember that these are 10-year-olds. They need information presented in a very specific way that aligns with their educational goals. I think it's better to keep it simple and focused on contemporary business practices. The real reason became clear a few days later when I overheard Michael on the phone with James's teacher. I'd be happy to come speak to the class about maritime commerce, he was saying. Sterling Maritime is one of the leading shipping companies in the region, and I think the kids would enjoy learning about modern cargo operations. No, that won't be necessary. I can handle all the background information they need. He was protecting his professional image by ensuring that his mother, whose expertise actually exceeded his own in historical and cultural areas, didn't overshadow him in front of James's teacher and classmates. The pattern extended to social situations as well. When Jennifer's book club decided to read a novel set in post-war Italy, she casually mentioned that I had lived in Italy for 6 months during the early years of Sterling Maritime's European expansion. Victoria has such fascinating insights about Italian culture and history, she told her friends during one of their meetings at our house. She's been to all the places the book describes. The women were intrigued and began asking me questions about my experiences in Italy. I found myself sharing stories about the small coastal towns where Jonathan and I had negotiated shipping agreements, the family-owned businesses we'd worked with, and the cultural nuances that had helped us build successful partnerships. But, as the conversation continued, I noticed Jennifer becoming increasingly uncomfortable. When one of her friends suggested that I should lead their discussion of the next Italy-focused book they were planning to read, Jennifer quickly redirected. That's so generous, but Victoria is incredibly busy these days. She's been helping us with so many family projects. After her friends left, Jennifer approached me with what seemed like gratitude but felt more like damage control. Thank you for sharing those stories with my book club. They were fascinated. But I hope you don't mind if I ask you to be a little more selective about what you share in the future. Some of those women are quite competitive about their travel experiences and cultural knowledge. I wouldn't want them to feel intimidated. I was being asked to downplay my own experiences and expertise to protect other people's feelings and Jennifer's social standing within her group. The most painful example came when Emma's school announced a cultural heritage project where students would research and present about their family backgrounds. Emma was excited to learn more about our family's history, particularly our connections to European maritime trade. "Grandma, could you help me with my project?" she asked. "I want to tell everyone about how you and Grandpa built Sterling Maritime and all the places you traveled for business." I was thrilled. This was exactly the kind of meaningful intergenerational connection I had hoped to build with my grandchildren. I had photographs, documents, artifacts, and stories that could bring our family history to life in ways that would be both educational and engaging. But when Emma mentioned the project to her parents, Michael's reaction was immediate and definitive. "I think it would be better if Emma focused on more recent family history," he said. "Maybe she could talk about Sterling Maritime's current operations, or even Jennifer's work in luxury goods marketing." "But I want to learn about the old days," Emma protested. "Grandma has all these cool stories about traveling to different countries and meeting interesting people." "Those stories are fascinating for family conversations," Jennifer said smoothly. "But they might be too complex for a school presentation. We want to make sure Emma's project is age-appropriate and focused." I watched my granddaughter's enthusiasm deflate as her parents systematically discouraged her interest in the very experiences that made our family history unique and compelling. That evening, after Emma had reluctantly agreed to focus her project on modern business practices, I found myself alone in the guest wing, surrounded by photo albums and mementos from decades of travel and business development that my own family considered inappropriate for sharing. But perhaps the most devastating revelation came during a conversation I wasn't supposed to hear. When Michael and Jennifer thought I was grocery shopping but had actually returned early because I'd forgotten my credit card. I was in the guest wing, looking for my wallet, when I heard their voices coming from the kitchen where they were apparently having coffee and discussing weekend plans. "I'm getting a little concerned about my mother's expectations," Michael was saying. "She seems to think she should be involved in every aspect of Emma and James's lives." "I've noticed that too," Jennifer replied. "She gets upset when we don't. Include her in school events or social activities. I think she's forgotten that she's here to help us, not to become some kind of alternative parent." "Exactly. She's been great with the practical stuff, the homework help, the household management, the entertaining when I bring clients home. But lately she seems to want credit and recognition for everything she does. It's like she thinks being helpful entitles her to decision-making authority. I don't want Emma and James getting confused about who's actually in charge of their lives." I stood frozen in the guest wing, listening to them discuss me like a problematic employee who was overstepping her boundaries. "Maybe we need to have a conversation with her about appropriate boundaries," Jennifer suggested. "Make it clear that while we appreciate her help, we're still the parents and the primary decision-makers. The problem is that she's so sensitive about feeling excluded. If we're too direct, she'll get emotional and make everything more complicated. Then we need to be more strategic about managing her involvement. Let her feel included in ways that don't actually matter, and gradually reduce her expectations about being part of important family decisions." "Like what we've been doing with the school events?" "Exactly. She can help Emma with art at home, but she doesn't need to be at the art show. She can teach James about maritime history in the living room, but she doesn't need to speak to his class. We get the benefit of her expertise without the complications of having her represent our family publicly." I felt physically sick. They were discussing strategies for manipulating my emotions and managing my expectations as if I were a difficult child, rather than a 70-year-old woman who had built an international business and raised a successful son. But the conversation wasn't over. I do worry about the long-term situation, Michael continued. She can't live here forever, and I'm not sure how we transition her out without creating family drama. What do you mean? I mean, she's gotten very comfortable here. She's rearranged the guest wing to suit her taste, she's established routines with the kids, and she seems to think this is her permanent home. But Jennifer, we always intended this to be temporary, just until she figured out what she wanted to do with her life. So, what are you suggesting? I think we need to start encouraging her to consider other options. Maybe suggest that she'd be happier in a senior community where she could make friends her own age. Or maybe we could help her find a nice apartment somewhere nearby so she could maintain independence while still being close to family. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. She's not going to want to leave voluntarily. She's too attached to Emma and James, and honestly, she's too useful here. Then we need to make the current arrangement less comfortable for her. Not cruel, just less accommodating. Make it clear that this is our house, our family, our decisions. How do we do that without being obvious about it? We start treating her more like a guest and less like a resident. We stop consulting her on household decisions. We make plans without including her. We establish clearer boundaries about her role with the children. They were planning my gradual exclusion from the family life I had thought I was becoming a meaningful part of. The goal, Michael concluded, is to help her realize that she'd be happier living independently while maintaining a more traditional grandmother relationship with Emma and James. You mean visits and holidays instead of daily involvement? Exactly. She can be a beloved grandmother without being a permanent household member. I quietly retreated to the guest wing, my hands shaking as I processed what I'd heard. They had never intended for this arrangement to be permanent. They had invited me to move in with them not out of love or concern for my well-being, but because they needed temporary help with childcare and household management during a busy period in their lives. And now that I had become inconveniently attached to my grandchildren and invested in family life, they were planning to gradually make me so uncomfortable that I would choose to leave. That evening, I sat at my antique writing desk, one of the few personal items I had brought from Newport, and began making a list. Not a list of grievances or complaints, but a list of phone numbers. Very specific phone numbers for very particular people. Because while Michael and Jennifer had been strategizing about how to manage me like a problematic domestic situation, I had been doing something they couldn't possibly have anticipated. I had been remembering exactly who I was before I became a widowed mother looking for a place in her son's family. I was Victoria Sterling, who had built international business relationships across 3 continents. I was the woman who had negotiated shipping contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I was someone who still had friends and allies in places that mattered, even if my son had forgotten that fact. And I was about to remind him, and everyone else, that treating someone with my background and resources like a dispensable household convenience was the kind of mistake that could change everything. But first, I had a few more phone calls to make. Very interesting phone calls to very old friends who were going to be quite surprised to hear from me, and then I was going to start planning the most educational family reunion in Sterling family history. The phone calls I had been making during those months of gradual exclusion and systematic dismissal weren't random conversations with old friends. They were strategic communications with some of the most influential people in the international maritime industry. People who remembered Victoria Sterling not as Michael's dependent mother, but as the brilliant businesswoman who had helped build one of the most successful shipping empires on the East Coast. The first call I made was to Dimitri Stavros in Athens. Dimitri and his family controlled the largest private shipping fleet in the Eastern Mediterranean, and Jonathan and I had maintained a business relationship with them for over 20 years. But more than that, Dimitri's daughter Maria had become one of my closest friends during the years when I regularly traveled to Europe for Sterling Maritime. "Victoria!" Dimitri's voice boomed through the phone when I reached him at his office in Piraeus. "My dear friend, it has been too long. Maria told me about Jonathan's passing. We were devastated to hear the news." Thank you, Dimitri. It's been a difficult year. But tell me, how is Sterling Maritime? Michael is doing well with the business, I hope. This was the conversation I had been dreading, but knew I needed to have. Actually, Dimitri, that's part of why I'm calling. Michael has decided to modernize our client relationships. I'm no longer actively involved in the company's operations. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Dimitri understood exactly what that meant in the context of family, businesses, and Greek shipping traditions. Victoria, this is very concerning. You were the heart of Sterling Maritime's European operations. Your relationships, your understanding of our culture and business practices, these things cannot be simply replaced with modern efficiency. I know, and frankly, Michael is already experiencing some of the consequences. We've lost several long-term partnerships because he's trying to conduct business through account managers and email rather than personal relationships. This is foolish, Dimitri said, and I could hear the anger in his voice. In our business, trust is everything. Personal. Relationships are everything. You cannot build shipping partnerships with spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations. I completely agree, but Michael is convinced that my approach is outdated. Outdated? Dimitri's voice rose. Victoria, you negotiated some of the most complex international shipping agreements I have ever seen. You understand maritime law, international commerce regulations, and cultural business practices better than most men who have been in this industry their entire lives. Your son is making a grave mistake. This was exactly the validation I needed to hear, but it was also the opening I had been hoping for. Dimitri, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. If I were to consider starting my own maritime consulting business, helping companies navigate European partnerships and international shipping agreements, do you think there would be interest in the industry? Interest? Dimitri laughed. Victoria, you would have more business than you could handle. There are dozens of American companies trying to expand into European markets who have no idea how to build the relationships necessary for success. And there are European companies who want to work with Americans but don't trust the young executives who treat business like a computer program. You really think so? I know so. In fact, I have been looking for someone exactly like you to help. Some of our partners navigate American business culture and regulations. If you were serious about consulting, I would be your first client. The conversation continued for another hour, with Dimitri describing specific opportunities and challenges that a consultant with my background could address. By the time I hung up, I had a clear understanding that my skills and experience were not only still valuable, they were actually in high demand. But more importantly, Dimitri had given me something I hadn't expected: information about opportunities that could change everything. Victoria, there is something else you should know, he had said near the end of our conversation. Alessandro? Romano's family is selling their yacht brokerage business in Monaco. Alessandro is retiring, and his sons are not interested in continuing the business. Alessandro Romano was an old friend whose family had been involved in luxury yacht sales and chartering for 3 generations. I had met him years ago when Jonathan and I were considering purchasing a yacht for both business entertaining and personal use. That's interesting, I said, not immediately understanding why Dimitri was telling me this. The business includes not just yacht sales, but a fleet of charter vessels and exclusive relationships with some of the most prestigious marinas in the Mediterranean. It is worth approximately 8 million euros, but Alessandro is motivated to sell quickly and would prefer to work with someone he trusts rather than pursue the highest offer. 8 million euros. For a business that I understood, in an industry where I had extensive relationships, located in a region where I had been working for decades. Dimitri, why are you telling me this? Because, my dear friend, if you are serious about independence and consulting, owning a yacht brokerage would give you credibility, resources, and access to the kind of clients who need exactly the services you could provide. And more than that, it would give you something your son clearly doesn't appreciate. What's that? Power. That conversation was the first of many I had over the following weeks. I called Maria Stavros in Santorini, Giuseppe Romano in Naples, François Dubois in Marseille, and Henrik Larsson in Copenhagen. These were people who had known me for decades, who had worked with Jonathan and me during the most successful years of Sterling Maritime, and who still remembered the woman I had been before I became a grieving widow looking for a place in her son's family. Every conversation followed a similar pattern. Initial expressions of sympathy about Jonathan's death, concern about my situation with Sterling Maritime, and then enthusiasm about the possibility of working with me again. But it was my conversation with Alessandro Romano himself that changed everything. Victoria Sterling. Alessandro's voice was warm with genuine affection when I reached him at his office in Monaco. It has been far too long. I was so sorry to hear about Jonathan. He was a good man and a good partner. Thank you. Alessandro, I miss him terribly. And how are things with your son's business? I heard there have been some changes at Sterling Maritime. The maritime industry is surprisingly small, and news travels quickly among the established families and companies. Alessandro already knew that I was no longer involved in Sterling Maritime's operations. Dimitri Stavros mentioned that you might be interested in selling Romano Yacht Brokerage, I said, deciding to be direct. Ah, Dimitri told you? Yes, it is true. My sons prefer their tech startups to boats, and I am ready to enjoy retirement with my grandchildren. But Victoria, I will be honest with you. I am very particular about who I sell to. This business has been in my family for 60 years. I want someone who understands not just yachts, but the culture and relationships that make this industry work. What would be involved in such a sale? The business includes our brokerage office in Monaco, a fleet of 12 charter yachts ranging from 80 to 200 feet, exclusive berthing agreements with marinas in Monaco, Cannes, Saint-Tropez, and Portofino, and established relationships with shipyards, captains, crew agencies, and luxury service providers throughout the Mediterranean. He paused, then continued with a tone that suggested he was making a significant decision. Victoria, if you are seriously interested, I would be willing to structure this as more than just a sale. I would stay on for 6 months to introduce you to all our clients and partners, help you establish your credibility in the market, and ensure a smooth transition. And because I know you and trust your judgment, I would be willing to accept a very reasonable price, 6 million euros instead of the 8 million I have been asking from other potential buyers. 6 million euros. Approximately $6.5 million. It was a staggering amount of money, but not an impossible amount for someone with my resources. Jonathan and I had been very successful, and despite Michael's assumption that I was financially dependent on family generosity, I still had significant assets that I had never discussed with him. Alessandro, could I ask you a hypothetical question? Of course. If someone were to own Romano Yacht Brokerage, what kind of influence would that give them in the Mediterranean luxury market? Alessandro laughed. Victoria, you would be one of the most powerful people in the industry. Our clients include European royalty, American tech billionaires, entertainment celebrities, and international business leaders. When someone wants to charter a yacht for a corporate event, a family vacation, or a social gathering in the Mediterranean, they come to us because we have access to the best vessels and the most exclusive locations. And the charter business specifically? We coordinate some of the most prestigious events in Europe: corporate retreats, family reunions, wedding celebrations, anniversary parties, all hosted aboard luxury yachts in some of the most beautiful locations in the world. Last year alone, we organized charters for 3 royal family celebrations, 5 Fortune 500 company events, and dozens of high-profile personal occasions. The possibilities were beginning to crystallize in my mind, but I needed to understand the timeline. How quickly would you need to complete such a sale? For the right buyer, I could have everything finalized within 6 weeks. I am motivated to retire, and frankly, I would prefer to work with someone I know and trust, rather than spend months negotiating with strangers. That night, I sat in my guest wing in Westport, surrounded by financial documents I hadn't looked at in months, calculating exactly what resources I had available. Jonathan and I had been conservative investors, but we had been very successful ones. In addition to my share of Sterling Maritime, which Michael controlled but which still generated dividends, I had personal investment accounts, real estate holdings, and a life insurance payout from Jonathan's death that I hadn't touched. The numbers were actually quite encouraging. I could purchase Romano Yacht Brokerage without liquidating all my assets or compromising my long-term financial security. More importantly, according to Alessandro's financial records, the business was profitable enough to provide me with both a comfortable income and the resources to expand my consulting activities. But there was something else that made this opportunity irresistible. Something that Michael and Jennifer could never have anticipated when they began planning to gradually exclude me from their family life. If I owned one of the most prestigious yacht brokerage businesses in the Mediterranean, I wouldn't just be able to provide luxury charter services to wealthy clients. I would be able to host events that would be absolutely impossible for anyone else to arrange. Events like, for example, the most exclusive family reunion anyone had ever attempted to organize. I began making more phone calls, but these conversations were different. I was no longer calling as Victoria Sterling, the displaced former business partner of Sterling Maritime. I was calling as the potential owner of Romano Yacht Brokerage, someone who would soon have access to resources and influence that most people could only dream of. My conversation with Captain James Morrison was particularly enlightening. James had been the captain of one of Romano's largest charter yachts for 8 years, and Alessandro had suggested I speak with him about the operational aspects of the business. "Mrs. Sterling, it would be an honor to work with you," James said when I explained my interest in purchasing Romano Yacht Brokerage. "Mr. Romano has told us wonderful things about your background in international maritime business. I'd like to understand what would be involved in organizing large-scale events aboard the charter fleet. We regularly coordinate events for 50 to 200 guests using multiple vessels or one of our larger yachts. Last summer, we hosted a Fortune 500 company retreat that involved 180 participants across 3 yachts, anchored in a private cove near Portofino. The clients were absolutely amazed by the level of service and the exclusive access we could provide. What about something like a family reunion? A large extended family wanting to celebrate a milestone anniversary or birthday? That's actually one of our specialties. We've organized several multi-generational family celebrations where different family groups stay on different yachts but come together for shared meals and activities. It allows for both intimacy and grandeur. Families can have private time, but also participate in larger celebrations. And the locations? We have access to some of the most exclusive anchorages in the Mediterranean, private coves that can only be reached by yacht, exclusive marina berths in Monte Carlo and Saint-Tropez, and special arrangements with luxury resorts for shore-based activities. As James described the possibilities, I began to envision exactly how I could use Romano Yacht Brokerage to create an event that would be absolutely impossible for Michael and Jennifer to replicate or compete with. But first, I needed to make the purchase official. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in Alessandro Romano's office in Monaco, signing the papers that made me the owner of one of the most prestigious yacht brokerage businesses in Europe. "Victoria, welcome to the family," Alessandro said as we shook hands after completing the transaction. "I am confident that you will take this business to new heights." "I have some very specific plans," I told him with a smile that he probably interpreted as enthusiasm for business growth. If only he knew. Over the following month, While Michael and Jennifer continued to treat me like a problematic household guest in Westport, I was secretly learning every aspect of the yacht charter business. I spent long phone calls with captains, crew managers, event coordinators, and marina directors, understanding exactly how to organize the kind of luxury experience that most people could never access. I also began planning something very specific: a Sterling family reunion that would celebrate what would have been Jonathan's 75th birthday. A gathering of our extended family and closest friends aboard a luxury yacht in the Mediterranean, hosted by the new owner of Romano Yacht Brokerage. An event so exclusive, so prestigious, and so impossible to attend without my personal invitation, that everyone who had ever known the Sterling family would be desperate to be included, especially the family members who had been systematically excluding me from their own celebrations. But I was getting ahead of myself. First, I needed to return to Westport and endure a few more months of being treated like disposable household help, because the longer they took me for granted, the more dramatic their education was going to be, and I wanted them to be absolutely certain that they no longer needed or wanted Victoria Sterling in their lives before I showed them exactly who Victoria Sterling really was. The stage was set. The resources were in place. The guest list was being carefully curated. All that remained was waiting for Michael and Jennifer to make the final move that would justify everything I was about to do. And based on the conversations I'd been overhearing, that moment was coming, very soon. The confrontation that would change everything came on a warm May evening, during what should have been a celebration of Emma's 8th grade graduation. But it became the moment when Michael and Jennifer finally revealed exactly how disposable they considered me to be. I had been living in their guest wing for nearly a year, providing thousands of dollars worth of services while being systematically excluded from any meaningful role in family decisions. During that time, I had secretly purchased Romano Yacht Brokerage and had been quietly planning the most exclusive family reunion in Sterling family history. But Michael and Jennifer had no idea about any of that. To them, I was still the financially dependent widow who should be grateful for their tolerance. The graduation dinner was supposed to be a family celebration at Le Bernardin in New York City, a restaurant I had actually recommended because Jonathan and I had entertained European clients there many times over the years. Emma had finished 8th grade with honors, particularly excelling in her art and French classes, subjects where my tutoring had been instrumental in her success. But when the day arrived, I discovered that my presence at the dinner was not actually part of the plan. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said that afternoon, approaching me in the guest wing with an expression I recognized from our Sterling Maritime board meetings, the look he wore when he was about to deliver disappointing news, that he expected me to accept graciously. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "It's about dinner tonight. Jennifer and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if this was just an immediate family celebration." I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach, but I tried to remain calm. "I am immediate family, Michael. I'm Emma's grandmother. Of course you are. But tonight is really about Emma's transition to high school, and we want her to feel like the absolute center of attention. Having too many adults at the table might dilute that focus." It was a reasonable-sounding explanation that made no actual sense. Emma loved spending time with me, and excluding her grandmother from her graduation celebration would hardly make her feel more special. "Emma specifically asked if I was coming to dinner," I said. "She wanted to tell me about her plans for summer art classes, and she can tell you all about it tomorrow," Jennifer said, appearing in the doorway with that bright, false smile she used when she wanted to seem accommodating while dismissing my concerns. "Tonight is really about celebrating her achievements with her parents and looking ahead to the next chapter of her education. The next chapter that I've been helping her prepare for with tutoring and encouragement for the past year." Michael's expression tightened slightly. "Mom, we appreciate everything you've done to help Emma with her studies, but tonight is about celebrating her individual achievements, not acknowledging the various people who've supported her along the way." The casual dismissal of my contributions as merely being one of various people who had supported Emma, was breathtaking in its cruelty. I had spent hours every week helping her with French conversation, teaching her art techniques, sharing cultural knowledge that had enriched her understanding of the world. But to her parents, I was just another support service that could be acknowledged or ignored as convenient. Besides, Jennifer added, we've made reservations for 4 people. Changing it now would be complicated. They had made reservations for 4 people. They had planned Emma's graduation celebration deliberately excluding me, then waited until the day of the dinner to inform me that I wasn't invited. But what came next was even worse. Actually, Mom, since you'll be home tonight anyway, would you mind handling something for us? Michael asked. James has a friend coming over for a sleepover, and it would be really helpful if you could supervise them while we're at dinner. They wanted me to babysit James and his friend while they celebrated Emma's graduation at one of the finest restaurants in New York City. They were excluding me from the family celebration and simultaneously asking me to provide free childcare services so they could enjoy their evening without worrying about their other child. You want me to stay home with James while you take Emma to celebrate her graduation? It's not like that, Jennifer said quickly. James understands that this dinner is specifically about Emma's achievement. He's excited about having his friend over. And honestly, he'd probably prefer staying home and playing video games to sitting through a long dinner at a fancy restaurant. But Emma would prefer having her grandmother at her graduation dinner. Emma will understand, Michael said, with finality. She's mature enough to recognize that different occasions call for different arrangements. I stared at my son, this man I had raised to be thoughtful and inclusive, who was now explaining why my granddaughter would understand being separated from her grandmother during one of the most important celebrations of her young life. Michael, do you remember when you graduated from 8th grade? I asked quietly. Of course. Do you remember how important it was to you that both your father and I were there to celebrate with you? How proud you were to introduce us to your teachers and friends? That was different. How was it different? Michael and Jennifer exchanged one of their looks, the wordless communication that had excluded me from countless family decisions over the past year. It was different because we were a nuclear family unit, Jennifer said, as if explaining something to a child. The dynamics are more complex now, with multiple generations and different needs to consider. More complex was code for, your presence complicates our preferred family image. But I wasn't done asking questions. Jennifer, when you graduated from 8th grade, was your grandmother there to celebrate with you? Yes, and did her presence diminish your parents' pride or make the evening less special for you? Of course not. But Victoria, you have to understand that Emma's situation is different. She's transitioning to a very competitive high school, where family presentation and social dynamics matter enormously. Family presentation? We want Emma to feel confident about her family structure when she starts high school. Having her understand the clear hierarchy and roles within our family will help her navigate social situations more effectively. I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. Jennifer was suggesting that my presence at Emma's graduation dinner would somehow undermine Emma's confidence about her family structure and hierarchy. What hierarchy is that exactly? I asked. Michael looked increasingly uncomfortable, but Jennifer seemed determined to make her point clear. Well, Michael and I are Emma's parents and primary decision makers. You're her grandmother, which is a different role with different boundaries. We want Emma to understand these distinctions as she gets older. And you think the best way to teach her about family roles is to exclude her grandmother from her graduation celebration? We think the best way is to model appropriate boundaries and help her understand that different relationships have different levels of involvement in major life events. I was being given a lecture about appropriate boundaries by the woman who had spent the past year treating me like a live-in domestic service while accepting my financial contributions, household management, childcare, and educational support. But Michael wasn't finished. Mom, I think it's time we had an honest conversation about expectations and long-term arrangements. My stomach dropped. This was the conversation I had been dreading but expecting since I'd overheard their strategic planning session months earlier. What kind of conversation? About your living situation and future plans. You've been with us for almost a year now, and while it's been wonderful having you close to the family, Jennifer and I think it might be time to consider other arrangements. That would give everyone more independence. Other arrangements? We've been researching some really lovely senior living communities in the area. Places where you could have your own space, make friends your own age, and still be close enough to see Emma and James regularly. Jennifer picked up the thread smoothly. There's a beautiful community in Greenwich that specializes in active seniors. They have art classes, cultural events, organized travel, all sorts of activities that might be more fulfilling than trying to find your place in our busy family schedule. They were telling me to move out. On the day of Emma's graduation, while excluding me from her celebration dinner, they were suggesting that I relocate to a senior living facility so I could stop being an inconvenience to their family life. And honestly, Michael continued, we think you'd be happier having your own space again. You've seemed a bit restless lately. Like maybe you're ready for a new chapter in your life. Restless. I had seemed restless because I had been systematically excluded from meaningful participation in my own family's life, while being expected to provide unpaid services and emotional labor. What about Emma and James? I asked. They're used to having me here. Emma especially has come to depend on our daily conversations and art sessions. And those can continue, Jennifer said brightly. Just in a more structured way. Planned visits, special outings, holiday celebrations. It might actually be better for the children to have more intentional time with their grandmother, rather than just casual daily interaction. More intentional time was code for less frequent contact under controlled circumstances. Besides, Michael added, Emma and James are getting older and developing their own interests and social lives. They need more independence to grow into confident teenagers. I looked at my son, this man who had convinced me to leave my home and move in with his family by promising that Emma and James needed their grandmother's daily presence and guidance. Now he was explaining why that same daily presence was hindering their development. So you want me to move out, limit my contact, with my grandchildren to scheduled visits, and celebrate Emma's graduation by staying home to babysit James? Mom, you're making this sound much more dramatic than it is, Michael said with the exasperated tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonably emotional. We're talking about a natural transition that would benefit everyone involved. How? Would it benefit me? You'd have your independence back, your own space, your own schedule, your own social life. You're only 70, Mom. You have years of active living ahead of you. Don't you want to explore what that could look like instead of just being available whenever we need help with household tasks? The irony was stunning. After a year of treating me like unpaid domestic help, Michael was now suggesting that I should want freedom from household tasks, as if I had been volunteering for drudgery, rather than trying to contribute meaningfully to family life. But Jennifer had one more twist to add. Victoria, we've also been thinking about the financial aspects of this transition. We know the past year has been expensive for you, contributing to household expenses, helping with the children's activities, all the ways you've been generous with our family. We don't want you to feel like you need to continue supporting us financially just to maintain a relationship with Emma and James. This was perhaps the most manipulative statement of all. They were framing their desire to exclude me as concern for my financial well-being, as if I had been financially straining myself to earn their tolerance. In fact, Michael added, we've been setting aside money to help you with the transition to your own place. We want to make sure you have everything you need to start this new chapter comfortably. They were offering to pay me to leave, money I didn't need, to solve a problem I hadn't created, to accept an exile I didn't deserve. I looked at these two, people who had spent a year systematically using my resources, expertise, and emotional labor, while gradually excluding me from any meaningful role in the family I had helped support. And I realized that this moment, Emma's graduation day, when they were asking me to babysit one grandchild while being excluded from the other's celebration, was the perfect crystallization of exactly how they viewed my worth. "You know what?" I said quietly, standing up from the chair where I'd been sitting during this devastating conversation. "You're absolutely right. It is time for a new chapter." Michael looked relieved. "I'm so glad you understand, Mom. We were worried you might be upset about the change." "Oh, I'm not upset about the change. I'm excited about it." "Really?" Jennifer seemed surprised by my positive response. "Really? In fact, I think tonight is the perfect time to start this new chapter. You should absolutely go celebrate Emma's graduation without me. And you shouldn't worry about James and his friend. I'll make sure they're taken care of." "That's wonderful, Mom. I knew you'd understand once we explained everything." "I understand perfectly. But Michael, before you go, there's something I need to tell you." "What's that?" "I need to give you my new contact information. Because starting tomorrow, I won't be living here anymore." Both Michael and Jennifer looked confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I'm moving out tonight. I have a new home waiting for me, and I think it's time I started living there." "But Mom, we just said we'd help you find a place. You don't have to make any hasty decisions." "It's not a hasty decision, Michael. I've been planning this for months." I walked to my writing desk and pulled out a folder I had been keeping ready for exactly this moment. "In fact, I have something for you. Consider it a graduation gift for Emma and a housewarming gift for yourselves." I handed Michael an envelope containing a printed invitation on elegant cream-colored cardstock. "What is this?" "It's an invitation to a Sterling family reunion, a celebration of what would have been your father's 75th birthday. I'm hosting it next month aboard a private yacht in the Mediterranean." Michael opened the invitation and stared at it with obvious confusion. "Mom, this looks incredibly expensive. How are you planning to pay for something like this?" "Oh, I'm not paying for it, Michael. I'm providing it. The yacht belongs to my company." "Your company?" "Romano Yacht Brokerage. I purchased it 2 months ago. It's one of the most prestigious luxury yacht charter businesses in Europe." The silence in the room was profound. Michael and Jennifer were staring at me like I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "You bought a yacht company?" "I bought a yacht company, along with a fleet of luxury vessels, exclusive marina relationships throughout the Mediterranean, and a client base that includes European royalty and Fortune 500 executives." Jennifer found her voice first. "How did you afford something like that?" "Well, it turns out that being married to Jonathan Sterling for 45 years and helping build Sterling Maritime into an international shipping empire left me with more resources than you realized. I'm worth approximately $12 million, Jennifer. I could have bought your house 3 times over without touching my investment portfolio." The expressions on their faces were priceless, a mixture of shock, confusion, and the dawning realization that they had been treating a multimillionaire like a financially dependent domestic worker. "But you never said anything," Michael stammered. "You never asked. In fact, you seemed quite determined to view me as someone who needed your financial support and charity. I was curious to see how long you'd maintain that fiction." I pulled out another document from my folder. "Here's the guest list for the reunion. 38 family members and close friends, including several people who've been asking about you, Michael. Dimitri Stavros is coming from Athens with his family. Giuseppe Romano is flying in from Naples. The Dubois family from Marseille. All the European partners who made Sterling Maritime successful, the people whose relationships you've been systematically destroying with your modern business practices." Michael's face had gone pale. "These people are coming to a family reunion?" "They're coming to honor your father's memory and celebrate the Sterling family legacy. The legacy that you've decided you want to modernize away from personal relationships and cultural understanding. And they're all going to be on your yacht?" "They're going to be on my yachts, plural. I'm chartering 3 vessels for the celebration. The main event will be aboard a 200-foot yacht anchored in a private cove near Portofino. It's the kind of exclusive experience that money can't buy. You have to have the right relationships and industry connections. I paused to let that sink in, then continued. Of course, you and your family are invited. Although I should mention that attendance is by invitation only. And given your recent priorities, I wasn't sure if you'd be interested in spending time with the people and traditions you've been working so hard to leave behind. Jennifer had finally found her voice. Victoria, I don't understand. If you have this kind of money and business success, why have you been living in our guest wing? Because, Jennifer, I wanted to see what kind of people you really were when you thought I needed you more than you needed me. I wanted to understand what my relationship with my son and his family was actually based on. And what did you conclude? I concluded that you're both exactly the kind of people who would exclude a grandmother from her granddaughter's graduation celebration while asking her to provide free childcare. You're exactly the kind of people who would treat a family member like disposable domestic help while accepting their financial contributions and expertise. Michael was staring at the invitation, clearly trying to process the implications. Mom, if we'd known about your business and financial situation, you would have treated me differently? Michael, do you understand how that sounds? You're telling me that you would have been more respectful if you'd known I was wealthy and successful, which means your respect was conditional on my status and resources, not on our family relationship. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. And it's exactly the problem. I picked up my purse and moved toward the door. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a flight to catch. I'm going to Monaco to finalize some business arrangements and ensure that everything is perfect for next month's reunion. You're leaving tonight? I'm leaving right now. I have a car waiting outside to take me to the airport. But what about James's sleepover? You said you'd take care of them. I smiled. I did say that, didn't I? Don't worry. I've arranged for a babysitter. Her name is Mrs. Chen, and she comes very highly recommended. She should be here within the hour. Consider it my final gift to your household management. Michael and Jennifer looked at each other with panic starting to set in. Mom, wait. Maybe we made a mistake about tonight. Maybe you should come to Emma's graduation dinner after all. Oh, Michael, that's very kind of you to reconsider. But I already have dinner plans. I'm meeting with Captain Morrison and the event planning team to finalize the details for the reunion. But Emma will be disappointed if you're not there. Emma will understand. After all, you said she's mature enough to recognize that different occasions call for different arrangements. I moved toward the door, then turned back. By the way, you should probably know that everyone on the reunion guest list has been asking about Sterling Maritime's recent changes in business practices. Apparently, word has gotten around that the company is no longer honoring the relationship-based partnerships that made it successful. Several people have expressed concern about working with Sterling Maritime under its new management approach. Michael's face went white. What are you saying? I'm saying that your father's 75th birthday celebration is going to include most of Sterling Maritime's former European partners, along with their recommendations for alternative American shipping companies that understand the value of personal relationships and cultural respect. You're trying to destroy my business? I'm not trying to destroy anything, Michael. I'm hosting a celebration of your father's legacy and the relationships he valued. What you choose to do with your business is entirely up to you. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Oh, and one more thing. The reunion invitation includes a +1 for spouses and children. Emma and James are absolutely welcome to attend. They are, after all, Jonathan's grandchildren and part of the Sterling family legacy. The Yacht has a wonderful educational program where children can learn about maritime history, European cultures, and international business relationships. I paused to let the irony sink in. Of course, attending would require them to spend time with their grandmother and learn about family traditions. I know that's not exactly aligned with your current priorities, but the invitation is open if you change your mind. Michael and Jennifer stood in stunned silence as I walked toward the front door. The reunion is scheduled for June 15th through 22nd, I called back. If you decide you'd like to attend, you can contact my office at Romano Yacht Brokerage. The number is on the invitation. As I reached the front door, I turned back one final time. Oh, and Michael? You might want to call Emma and explain that her grandmother had to leave town unexpectedly on business. I'm sure she'll understand that different occasions call for different arrangements. I walked out of their house and into the waiting car, leaving behind a year of being treated like a convenient domestic resource and stepping into my new life as one of the most influential people in the Mediterranean luxury market. 3 hours later, I was in first class on a flight to Monaco, sipping champagne and reading emails from potential clients who wanted to charter my yachts for their own exclusive events. And 3 weeks after that, I received a very interesting phone call from Michael. Mom, we've been thinking about the reunion invitation. Oh, Emma and James are very excited about the idea of spending time on a yacht and learning about their grandfather's business relationships. That's wonderful. Children should understand their family heritage. And Jennifer and I have been reconsidering some of our recent business decisions at Sterling Maritime. We think it might be valuable to reconnect with some of Dad's former partners. How interesting. So we were wondering if the invitation is still open. I looked out from the deck of my flagship yacht, anchored in the pristine waters off the coast of Portofino, where I was overseeing final preparations for what would be the most exclusive and talked-about family reunion in recent memory. Of course, the invitation is still open, Michael. Your family. Thank you, Mom. We really appreciate it. But I should mention that there are some conditions for attending. What kind of conditions? Well, since this is a celebration of your father's approach to business and relationships, everyone attending will be expected to participate in discussions about the importance of personal connections, cultural understanding, and treating people with respect regardless of their apparent status or resources. There was a long pause. We understand. And since this is a family event focused on honoring relationships across generations, there will be many opportunities for grandparents to spend meaningful time with their grandchildren, sharing family history and traditions. That sounds wonderful. And since this is a reunion of people who value authentic relationships over convenient arrangements, everyone will be expected to treat each other as valued family members rather than as useful resources to be managed. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, we understand. And we want you to know that we've learned a lot over the past few weeks. What have you learned? We've learned that we made terrible mistakes in how we treated you. We took you for granted. We dismissed your contributions. And we completely underestimated both your capabilities and your worth. And we're sorry. We're genuinely, deeply sorry for treating you like anything less than the remarkable woman you are. I smiled, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean while my staff prepared for an event that would be remembered for decades by everyone who attended. Apology accepted, Michael. I'll have Captain Morrison send you the detailed itinerary and travel arrangements. Thank you, Mom, for everything. You're welcome. And Michael? Yes? Pack formal attire. We'll be dining with royalty. The Sterling. Family reunion was everything I had envisioned and more. For 7 days, aboard 3 luxury yachts in the most beautiful waters of the Mediterranean, 38 family members and friends celebrated Jonathan's memory and the legacy of relationships he had built over 4 decades. Emma and James spent hours learning about their grandfather's business philosophy, hearing stories from European partners who spoke of Jonathan's integrity and respect for different cultures. They practiced their language skills with Italian and Greek guests, learned about maritime navigation from professional captains, and discovered a family heritage far richer and more international than they had ever imagined. Michael spent the week rebuilding relationships that his modern business practices had damaged, slowly realizing that the personal connections he had dismissed as outdated were actually the foundation of Sterling Maritime's success. Jennifer discovered that being married to a shipping executive meant being part of a global community of sophisticated, accomplished people who valued knowledge, cultural understanding, and authentic relationships over social status and competitive networking. And I discovered something I had almost forgotten during that difficult year in Westport: who I really was when I was treated with the respect and appreciation I deserved. On the final evening of the reunion, as we anchored in a secluded cove near Cinque Terre for a farewell dinner under the stars, Michael found me on the deck of the main yacht. "Mom, can we talk?" "Of course. I want you to know that this week has been incredible. Not just the yacht and the locations and the luxury, but seeing you in your element. Watching you coordinate something this complex, manage relationships with people from different countries and cultures, handle business discussions in multiple languages. I had forgotten how remarkable you are." "Thank you, Michael. And I want you to know that when we get back to the States, things are going to be different, at Sterling Maritime and in our family." "How so?" "I want you to come back to Sterling Maritime, not as an advisor or consultant, but as a partner. I want to rebuild the European relationships we've lost, and I want to learn from your experience instead of dismissing it. And in the family? I want you to be Emma and James's grandmother in the fullest sense. Not someone we include when it's convenient, but someone who's integral to their understanding of who they are and where they come from." I looked at my son, this man who had spent a year treating me like disposable help, now offering me everything I had wanted when I first moved to Westport. "Michael, I appreciate that offer, but I think I'm quite happy with my new life." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Romano Yacht Brokerage is thriving. I have more business than I can handle, and I'm genuinely excited about building something new rather than trying to recapture something that's already been lost." "But what about family? What about being close to Emma and James?" "Family isn't about proximity, Michael. It's about respect, love, and shared experiences. This week has shown me that I can have meaningful relationships with my grandchildren without living in your guest wing or accepting being treated as a household convenience." "So you're staying in Monaco?" "I'm staying in my new life. Emma and James are welcome to visit me whenever they want. In fact, I'm planning several educational trips that would give them incredible exposure to art, culture, and history. And you and Jennifer are welcome in my life too, as long as you remember what you've learned about treating people with respect." Michael nodded slowly. "We won't forget." "I hope not, because Michael, this is the last time I'm going to rescue you from the consequences of underestimating someone you should have valued." As I stood on the deck of my yacht, surrounded by family and friends who appreciated both my contributions and my company, watching my grandchildren laugh with new friends from different countries, I realized that the year I had spent being treated like a burden had actually been a gift. It had forced me to remember who I was when I wasn't trying to earn someone else's approval. It had motivated me to build something new, rather than clinging to something that was being taken away from me. And most importantly, it had taught me that respect isn't something you beg for. It's something you require. The Sterling family reunion became legendary in the maritime industry, talked about for years as the perfect example of how to honor relationships while celebrating success. Romano Yacht Brokerage became the most sought-after charter company in the Mediterranean, with a waiting list of clients who wanted to experience the kind of exclusive elegance that only Victoria Sterling could provide. And I became exactly what I had always been, but had temporarily forgotten: a remarkable woman whose worth wasn't determined by other people's opinions, whose value wasn't diminished by other people's blindness, and whose happiness wasn't dependent on other people's approval. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is being told you're not wanted by people who never deserved you in the first place. And sometimes the most educational gift you can give someone is showing them exactly what they lost when they decided you weren't worth keeping. The Sterling family learned both lessons perfectly, and I learned the most important lesson of all. That the right response to being called a burden is not to prove you're not a burden. It's to become too powerful for anyone to dare treat you like one ever again. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.